She smiled for the camera. Just another selfie on another quiet afternoon. But then her eyes caught something in the reflection behind her, a shadow, a shape, someone. Her breath stopped. The smile froze on her face like shattered glass. For 3 impossible seconds, she couldn't move, couldn't blink, couldn't process what her phone screen was showing her. The uniform folded on the chair in her memory suddenly became real, standing right there, close enough to touch. Her heart didn't just skip, it exploded, because the man she'd been waiting for, the man who hadn't answered in 93 days, the man whose boots by the door had been gathering dust, was standing right behind her, and she had no idea he was home. Months had passed since Emma last heard his voice, the real one, not the recorded version she played on loop at 2 a.m. when sleep refused to come. Captain Reed's deployment had stretched from weeks into months, and somewhere along the way, she'd stopped counting days and started measuring time in silence. The camera became her lifeline, her way of pretending life was still moving forward when everything inside her felt frozen. One selfie at a time, she documented a world that kept spinning without him, sunsets he'd never see, coffee cups that stayed full because she forgot to drink, empty chairs at dinner tables where his laugh used to fill the room. She'd smile at the lens, caption it with something light, something easy, and hit send into the void, hoping that somewhere across oceans and war zones he'd see it and know she was still here, still waiting, still his. But here's the thing about waiting, that nobody tells you it changes you in ways you don't recognize until you catch your reflection and realize you've become someone else entirely. Emma used to wear bright colors, reds and yellows, that made her feel alive. Now her closet was full of grays and blacks, colors that matched the weight she carried in her chest. She used to talk about the future like it was something certain, something they could plan for. Now she spoke in maybes and if he comes home, careful never to tempt fate with too much hope. Duty and love had become 2 sides of the same impossible coin. She was proud of him, proud of his honor, proud of his sacrifice. But God, she was tired. Tired of being strong. Tired of pretending the flag on the table was enough to fill the space where he should be. Tired of sending photos into silence and wondering if he'd ever see them, or if one day she'd just stop getting replies forever. The hardest part wasn't the big moments, the birthdays he missed, or the anniversaries that came and went unmarked. It was the small, stupid things that broke her. The way his pillow still smelled like him for the first 2 weeks, then didn't. The way she'd set the table for 2 out of habit, then stare at the empty plate and feel like an idiot. The way strangers would ask, "How's your husband?" and she'd have to smile and say he's good, when the truth was, she hadn't heard his voice in over 3 months, and had no idea if good was even close to accurate. So she kept taking photos, kept smiling, kept pretending that capturing moments could somehow make up for all the ones they were missing together. And maybe, just maybe, if she documented enough of her life without him, the universe would see how much she was holding on and decide it was time to bring him home. While Captain Reed fought storms and sand halfway across the world, Emma captured sunsets and empty chairs, sending photos he might never see. She'd stand in their backyard at golden hour, phone raised to the sky, trying to frame the perfect shot, something beautiful enough to remind him what home looked like, what he was fighting to come back to. But every time she hit send, doubt crept in like a shadow. Was he even getting these? Was his phone charged? Was he safe enough to check messages? Or was he somewhere so dangerous that a glowing screen could give away his position? The questions piled up with no answers. And still, she kept sending. A photo of his coffee mug on the kitchen counter, a snapshot of their dog sleeping on his side of the bed, a picture of the uniform folded on the chair in their bedroom, waiting like a ghost for the body that would fill it again. Each image was a prayer disguised as pixels, a way of saying, "I'm still here," when words felt too heavy to type. The mission he'd been sent on was classified one of those assignments, where "I can't tell you" became the most honest thing he could say. She didn't know if he was in the desert or the mountains, didn't know if he was leading troops or sitting in some cramped operations center staring at screens for 18 hours straight. All she knew was that when he left, he'd kissed her forehead, adjusted the flag on the table by the front door, and said, "I'll be back before you know it." That was 7 months ago. 7 months of living in a strange kind of limbo where she wasn't a widow but wasn't really a wife, either, just a woman frozen in the space between goodbye and homecoming, wondering if love could survive this much distance. She'd read somewhere that military spouses were the backbone of sacrifice, that they carried the weight of duty and love in equal measure. But nobody mentioned how lonely that weight could be, or how some nights she'd stand in the kitchen and talk to the empty air just to hear a voice of own, if it was only her own. The world kept moving around her, like nothing had changed. Friends got engaged, had babies, complained about their husbands leaving socks on the floor or forgetting anniversaries. And Emma would smile and nod, biting back the urge to scream. At least he's there. At least you know he's safe. At least you can touch him. She started avoiding social gatherings, making excuses about being tired or busy, when the truth was, she couldn't stand being around people who didn't understand what it felt like to love someone you couldn't reach. His boots by the door became a shrine she couldn't bring herself to move. Some mornings, she'd sit on the floor beside them, tracing the dried mud on the soles, trying to remember the sound of his footsteps coming through that door. And then she'd grab her phone, open the camera, and take another picture of the sunrise, of the garden he'd planted before he left, of anything that said, "Life is still happening here," even if it felt like she was just going through the motions, waiting for the moment everything could start again. His last message ended mid, "Emma, I need to tell you something." And then nothing. No period. No explanation. Just a digital cliff that left her staring at the screen for hours, refreshing over and over like somehow the rest of the words would magically appear. She told herself it was nothing. Maybe his battery died. Maybe the signal dropped. Maybe he got called away for something urgent, and he'd finish the thought later. But later never came. The phone stayed silent for 93 days. 93 mornings of waking up and checking for his name on the screen. 93 nights of falling asleep with the ringer on high, just in case. 93 days of building scenarios in her head that ranged from "he's just busy" to things so dark she couldn't even speak them out loud. The uniform folded on the chair started to feel less like a promise and more like a relic, something left behind by a man who might never come back to claim it. She stopped wearing colors on day 4. It wasn't a conscious decision, more like her body knew something her mind refused to accept. The reds and yellows that used to make her feel alive now felt like lies, like she was pretending to be okay when everything inside her was screaming. Gray felt honest. Black felt safe. Navy blue felt like the only color that matched the ocean of uncertainty she was drowning in. Friends noticed. Her mom called, worried. "You're not yourself," they'd say, as if she didn't already know. But how could she explain that every unanswered day carved away a piece of who she used to be? That waiting wasn't passive, it was a full-time job that paid in anxiety and sleepless nights. Duty and love weren't supposed to feel like enemies. But some days she resented both. Resented him for leaving. Resented herself for not being stronger. Resented the flag on the table for representing something that was costing her everything. The doubt crept in like smoke slow. Silent, suffocating. At first, she fought it. He's fine. He's trained for this. He'll call when he can. But as the weeks turned into months, those reassurances started to feel hollow. What if something happened? What if he was hurt and couldn't reach out? What if and... This was the thought that kept her up at night. What if he'd changed his mind about coming home? About her? War did things to people. She'd heard the stories. Men who came back different. distant, unreachable. Men who couldn't reconcile the honor of the mission with the messencies of real life. What if 93 Days of Silence wasn't about danger or deployment restrictions? What if it was about him letting go, and she was just too stubborn to see it? She'd grab her phone, scroll through old photos of them together, in his uniform, her in his arms, both of them laughing like the world couldn't touch them. And she'd wonder if sacrifice meant losing him, even if he survived, if love could outlast the kind of distance that swallowed words and left only echoes behind. At a family picnic, her friend asked for just one picture. Emma almost said no. She'd been saying no to a lot of things lately, finding excuses to stay home, to avoid crowds, to keep her grief private. But her sister had begged, and her mom had given her that look that said, please try, so she went. The park was full of noise, kids laughing, dogs barking, the smell of charcoal and burgers drifting through the air. It should have felt normal, comforting even. But to Emma, it all felt distant, like she was watching life happen through a thick pane of glass. She stood there with a paper plate in one hand, forcing smiles that didn't reach her eyes, when her friend Sarah grabbed her arm and said, come on, let's get a photo by the trees. The lights, perfect. Emma wanted to argue, to say she wasn't in the mood, but Sarah was already pulling her toward the clearing. Phone in, and insistent in that way friends are when they're trying to pull you back to the land of the living. She turned her back to the sun, letting the golden light spill over her shoulders, while Sarah framed the shot. Smile like you mean it, Sarah teased. And Emma tried. God, she tried. She thought about the last selfie she'd sent to Reed, the one that disappeared into 93 Days of Silence. She thought about his boots by the door, the flag on the table, the uniform folded on the chair, waiting for a man who might never wear it again. And then, just as Sarah was about to press the button, Emma's eyes drifted to her phone, screened to the reflection in the glass. There was a shape behind her, a figure, tall, familiar, wearing something that looked like ... No, it couldn't be. Her brain refused to process it, refused to believe what her eyes were screaming at her. The world slowed down, sound muffled like she'd been plunged underwater. Her heart didn't beat, it detonated. She turned, not quickly. Her body wouldn't let her move that fast, like it needed time to prepare for what might be real or might shatter her completely. And there he was, Captain Reed, standing 10 feet away. His uniform was torn at the shoulder, dust still clinging to his boots, his face thinner than she remembered, but unmistakably his eyes, those eyes she'd memorized, dreamed about, cried over, were locked on hers, trembling with something between relief and terror, like he wasn't sure if she'd run to him or run away. For a moment, neither of them moved. The picnic noise faded into nothing. The trees stopped swaying. Time didn't just stop, it surrendered. Emma's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her hands shook so hard, she nearly dropped her phone. And then, as if her body remembered what her mind couldn't grasp, her legs moved. 1 step, 2, 3. And then she was running like she'd been running toward this moment for 93 days. Running like her life depended on closing the space between them. The photo caught it all. Sarah's camera captured the exact second Emma's shock melted into surrender, the way her face crumbed, the way her arms flew open, the way Reed dropped his duffel bag and met her halfway. It caught the collision of two people who'd been broken by distance and were suddenly, impossibly, whole again. Emma hit him with the full weight of 7 months of waiting, and he caught her like he'd been practicing in his head every single day he was gone. Her arms locked around his neck, her face buried in his chest, and she sobbed deep, guttural sobs that came from a place she didn't know existed. He held her so tight she could barely breathe, one hand tangled in her hair, the other pressed against her back like he was trying to make sure she was real. "I'm here," he whispered. voice cracked and raw. "I'm home. I'm so sorry. I'm Erre. And Emma couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but hold on and let herself break apart in the arms of the man she thought she'd lost. Duty had brought him away. Love had brought him back. And in that moment, honor and sacrifice finally made sense. The camera kept recording. It captured her knees buckling. It captured him sinking down with her, both of them kneeling in the grass, holding each other like the world might try to rip them apart again if they let go. It captured the way her hands frantically moved over his face, his shoulders, his chest, like she needed to touch every part of him to believe he was real. It captured the homecoming she'd imagined 1,000 times, but never thought would actually happen. Orders had kept him silent. The mission had kept him away. But now, with his forehead pressed against hers, and his breath mixing with her tears, none of that mattered. He was home. Was hers. And the phone that had carried so many unanswered photos, so many one-sided conversations, had finally captured the one image that would rewrite every lonely day that came before Ithamom loved one. She didn't drop the phone, just let it hang from her fingers as her arms finally found home again. The device that had been her only connection to him for 7 months. The screen that had glowed with unanswered messages and one-sided hope suddenly meant nothing. Because he was here. Solid, real, breathing against her neck in a way that made every second of waiting dissolve into this single, perfect moment. His uniform was rough against her cheek, smelling of dust and distance and something she couldn't name, maybe sacrifice, maybe survival, maybe just the scent of a man who'd crossed hell to get back to her. She could feel his heartbeat, fast and uneven, matching the rhythm of her own. They stayed like that, kneeling in the grass, while the world buzzed around them, family members realizing what was happening, voices rising in surprise and joy, someone starting to clap, but none of it reached them. They existed in a bubble where time had stopped, where duty and love had finally aligned, where the mission was over, and the only orders that mattered were the ones their hearts were giving. Hold on. Don't let go. This is real. Reed pulled back just enough to look at her, his hands cupping her face, like she was something precious he'd almost lost. His thumbs wiped away tears that wouldn't stop falling, and his eyes, God, those eyes were swimming with everything he couldn't say. "I tried to call," he whispered, voice breaking on every word, "every single day. But we went dark. Complete communications blackout. I couldn't. Emma, I couldn't tell you I was okay. I couldn't tell you I was coming home. And it killed me." She shook her head, pressing her fingers to his lips. "You're here now," she managed, voice raw and shaking. "That's all that matters. You're here." And it was true. 93 days of silence, of doubt, of wearing gray because colors felt like lies. All of it evaporated the second his arms wrapped around her again. The flag on the table back home didn't seem so heavy anymore. The uniform folded on the chair finally had a body to fill it. His boots by the door would leave fresh tracks again. Honor had demanded his absence. Sacrifice had carved out the space between them. But love's de bon, relentless, unbreakable love had brought him back. Some reunions are captured before the heart can understand them. Emma would look at that photo later, the one Sarah took in those first impossible seconds. She wouldn't recognize herself. The woman in the picture looked shattered and whole at the same time, broken open by relief, rebuilt by the arms holding her together. You could see it in her face, the way shock and joy collided into something that transcended both. You could see it in his posture, the way he bent around her, like she was the only thing keeping him upright after months of standing alone. The deployment had taken pieces of both of them, her hope, his peace, their certainty that love could survive anything. But the homecoming gave it all back. Plus, something new, the knowledge that they'd survived the worst and come out the other side, still reaching for each other. The picnic continued around them eventually. People gave them space, then slowly pulled them into hugs and congratulations and questions Redwood answered later, when his voice worked again. But for now, he just held her, and she let herself be held. Because after 93 days of silence, sometimes the most profound thing you can say is nothing at all. Just let your body remember what your mind had started to forget, that you belong to someone, and they've finally come home to claim you. So here's my question for you. What are you waiting for? What moment are you postponing because the wait feels too long, the silence too heavy, the distance too wide? Emma almost didn't go to that picnic. She almost stayed home, wrapped in her grief, convinced that hope was just another word for disappointment. But she showed up. She'll let herself be seen, and in doing so, she allowed life to surprise her in ways she never imagined. That's the thing about sacrifice and love. They demand everything from us, strip us down to our rawest selves, but they also prepare us to receive the kind of joy that can only exist on the other side of pain. So I'm asking you, are you showing up for your life, even when it hurts? Are you still taking the photos, sending the messages, folding the uniform with trembling hands? Because deep down, you believe the story isn't over yet. Maybe you're not waiting for a soldier to come home. Maybe you're waiting for a different kind of reunion with a dream you gave up on, with a version of yourself you lost along the way, with hope itself. Whatever it is, don't stop now. Don't let the silence convince you that the wait is pointless, because duty and love, honor and sacrifice, they're not just military words, they're human ones. They're about showing up even when you're broken, about holding space for what you can't see yet, about trusting that the reflection in the glass might just reveal exactly what you've been praying for. Emma's story could have ended in 93 days of unanswered silence, but it didn't, and yours doesn't have to either. If this story reminded you that love is worth the wait, that homecoming is worth the heartbreak, that some moments are worth capturing even when you can't see what's coming, then do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. Turn on the notifications, because there are more stories like this one. Stories that will make you believe again. Stories that prove the flag on the table and the boots by the door aren't symbols of loss, they're symbols of hope. Keep showing up. Keep taking the photos. Keep believing that the mission isn't over until love wins. And trust me, it will. It always does.